Megan, you did a great job of that. Thank you so much. Give her a big hand. She's a great reader, absolutely. Thank you, Kate. You too. Sorry about that. How many of you have ever been suspicious? Suspicious? You know, a lot of people, when I mention the word, when they think about suspicion, they think about what the movies give cause for suspicion always. Someone is playing around on someone else, exercising a little infidelity in the relationship. And I was doing some research on that, and the stats indicate that 30 to 60% of married adults in North America at some point in the course of their marriage over the years will engage in infidelity and some extra relational affair. 30 to 60%. So that means that the odds are very, very high that there is someone here in this church this morning having an extramarital affair. If you are with a partner, or even if you're not, look at the person next to you and consider whether or not they are having some indiscreet or discreet extra liaison that you don't know about. I bet you're all very suspicious right now, aren't you? What was that, Roddy? I didn't quite catch that, but Roddy and Jane, we'll have to keep an eye on the two of them here. Well, I want to talk about suspicion this morning. And I don't want to talk about that kind of suspicion, infidelity, but I do want to talk about suspicion because I was in a conversation with my dear neighbor a few weeks ago. And he's sitting right there, and he gave me permission to name him, so I'll name him. Keith says any publicity is better than no publicity, a la Donald Trump, he said. So he said I can refer to him. So Keith and I were having a conversation next door a couple of weeks ago, and Keith was actually in a real tizzy, if I can say it. He was absolutely rip-snorting mad. And Keith was mad about some stuff that had been in the news that day about glyphosate being sprayed all across our province, that permissions had been given to a variety of companies and landowners to spray glyphosate across the province. And glyphosate is a defoliate chemical, right? And at the same time that announcement was made, Robert Strang, the chief medical officer of the province, also came out and said, yes, it's totally safe. You don't have to worry about it. And Keith looked at me and he snorted, just like that. And he said, I'm not having any of it. I don't buy it for one bit that all this chemical is safe that we've got being sprayed on the province, he said. It's just Keith, it's an abomination. That's the word you used. It's an abomination. So I had been paying attention to this story a little bit as well because glyphosate has been linked with lymphoma, and as you know, that I've had years ago. So I've been a little bit curious about the story. So I thought I'm going to do a little bit of research on the spraying of glyphosate in our province, and I'm just going to see if my neighbor has cause to be this suspicious about this product. Okay. So this is a little bit of the research, okay? This is a little bit of what I came up with, okay? So glyphosate is what's called as kind of a broad category defoliant. And a defoliant is a chemical that, of course, eliminates plants with foliage, with leaves and with broader leaves. And it's particularly used in Nova Scotia to target hardwood trees. So it's utilized to promote the promotion of softwood timber in the province by snuffing out hardwood trees at basically a very young age, okay? It's produced by Monsanto, okay? which is you've seen Monsanto in the news lately. And I'm not sure what the outcome has been. There's this big multinational kind of linking of Monsanto and Bayer, I guess, in Germany. Monsanto is the same company that produced Agent Orange, right? Agent Orange, which was a weaponized defoliant used in Vietnam for a number of years, millions upon millions of gallons of Agent Orange sprayed in the jungles of Vietnam as in the military operation as a way to strip away the foliage so military operations could happen more effectively, okay? Agent Orange did not have glyphosate in it. So you need to know that. There's nothing of glyphosate in Agent Orange. That was a totally different chemical, but the chemicals in Agent Orange did end up being responsible for all sorts of birth defects and health problems and cancers as well, both in American service people as well as, of course, with the Vietnamese in the jungle. The other thing in my research on Monsanto is that it's not considered to be a very nice company. So this is the thing you need to know about Monsanto. This is a very soft kind of argument, very subjective kind of thing, but it's not considered to be a nice company. And the United Church of Canada has been very critical of Monsanto for decades now, as well as environmental groups and nonprofits have been very, very critical of the company. And not just because of the chemicals that it produces in the environment, or the fact that it helped to create this weaponized chemical, Agent Orange, but also because it's a company that has tried to control the production and distribution of seed, so that in a previous era, farmers would have easy access to seeds, and they could actually share seeds amongst themselves. But what Monsanto has done is put patents on all sorts of seeds, and so farmers no longer have the same access to seed like they used to have in an earlier time. Glyphosate was developed in the 70s by Monsanto scientists, and it's been used for decades. It's been used all around the world for decades now, including across Nova Scotia and including across a number of governments in Nova Scotia. It's been used. The problem with glyphosate is that weeds that it's intended to destroy have now also become resistant to glyphosate, right? And crops that are also being produced have become resistant to glyphosate as well. So they're having to produce genetically modified crops that will not be affected by glyphosate, and weeds that snuff out crops are also becoming resistant to glyphosate. So new chemicals need to be produced, right, to deal with those kinds of situations. There have been so many mixed reports on the safety of glyphosate. You've heard that the World Health Organization put out a major report saying they thought glyphosate was carcinogenic, and then another report just came out saying, no, they don't think glyphosate is carcinogenic at all. So there have been all these mixed reports regarding the safety of glyphosate. Provinces rely upon Health Canada, and I think this is right, some of our medical folks. Provinces rely upon reports done and investigations done by Health Canada to decide on whether or not to approve a product here in the province for its safety record. But biologists say, and that's what Robert Strang was doing, when he said glyphosate is safe, he was relying upon reports by Health Canada that said glyphosate is safe. But other biologists have said that Health Canada's data, because glyphosate has been around for so long, is old and outdated and isn't really all that pertinent any longer. One of the problems with the studies of glyphosate is that a lot of studies of glyphosate with regards to its safety have been done on glyphosate as a chemical unto itself. Okay, just on itself. They haven't investigated glyphosate in combination with the other chemicals with which it's combined in products like the one that's being utilized around the province called Vision Max. Okay, that's the key product. And in Nova Scotia, the product that's being used to defoliate our forests is Vision Max, and 50% of that chemical consists of glyphosate. The other 50% consists of a bunch of other detergents and other chemicals that are also nasty as heck for the environment. And apparently actually, what many biologists say is that it's the combination of glyphosate with the other chemicals in various products that actually has a synergistic component that actually increases the toxicity of glyphosate far beyond what the toxicity of glyphosate might be when it's analyzed solely by itself as a single agent. The other argument that's often used with regards to glyphosate is that it's, and you remember this in the news, it's totally safe when used properly. But the argument has been made often that the inspection and the monitoring of the usage of glyphosate is often non-existent. And throughout Europe, studies have been done of all sorts of people throughout Europe that have found glyphosate in the pee of European citizens. So glyphosate, which is supposed to be restricted to places and not supposed to get into the water stream and into the watershed, it probably, in fact, is, okay? And finally, what a lot of the arguments don't take into account is the one that our kids said earlier on that was so appropriate, and that is that as we look at the larger picture of defoliating large sections of our forests, of eliminating certain species of trees, what we're actually doing is we're in the process of destroying habitat for animals that is quite critical, right? So the whole idea is that many of the big companies, the pulp and paper companies and the biomass electrical generator, use softwood products in their products, right? And so they don't want hardwood trees. And so the risk is that we move towards creating a monoculture province in which there's only softwood trees at the exclusion of all the hardwood species. My research seems to indicate to me that my good neighbor Keith here, when I looked at all the research, I thought, he has darn good cause to be suspicious. A holy suspicion. The prophets and Jesus were often very suspicious of the respectable authorities of their day and age as well. The passages this morning are quite interesting. Jesus says a father goes out and he's asked two sons to do something. One son says, "Sure, Dad, I'll go do it. I'll take care of business. Everything's going to be copacetic and hunky-dory." Jesus says, "Yeah, and what happens?" Of course, he doesn't do what he says he's going to do at all, right? Suspicious. And then, of course, Jesus tells that other story about the Pharisee and the tax collector. The Pharisee is the respectable kind of person in his society who is supposed to lift up, good, reliable information and whatnot, and the Pharisee proves to be the hypocrite in Jesus' eye, the one that you wouldn't trust, the one Jesus is suspicious of. And Jesus says it's often the people that you least expect to be reliable who are reliable. I remember years and years and years ago, back in seminary days, I think it must have been Theology 101, something like that, back in seminary days. And I was introduced to a highly technical kind of academic kind of term. And that term was called a hermeneutic of suspicion, okay? And what's a hermeneutic of suspicion? A hermeneutic is a word, it's basically a fancy word that refers to interpretation, okay? So the course was suggesting, and I think it was actually a course in a feminist perspective on the world. And the course was suggesting that you need to view the world, it's helpful in certain situations, to view the world through an interpretation of suspicion. Don't believe everything you read or hear, even necessarily from the most respectable of authorities, because it ain't necessarily so. And the feminist perspective on this is that a feminist would say, the majority of the world's history and sociology has been written by who? It's been written by men. So if it's all been written by men, you can bet that the interpretation of things is going to be very much from a male perspective. Think about history too. When wars have been concluded over the years, who generally writes the history of wars? The victors. It's the people who won the wars whose interpretation of what was going on in the war is generally received as truth. The hermeneutic of suspicion says that wherever you can sniff out an ulterior motive, wherever you think there's a desire to maintain the status quo, wherever somebody has an investment in something being received and understood in a certain way, you should probably be a little bit suspicious of that. A holy suspicion. A holy suspicion that really seeks out truth. How many of you really believe Donald Trump, that he's going to make America great again? He's a perfect example. I'm not saying Hillary's perfect in that regard either, right? But a perfect example, and that's what somebody says, there's no way if Donald Trump becomes president that he won't be just loaded with conflict of interest all over the place. And yet he says, I'm going to make America great by bringing trillions of dollars from overseas back to America. All the business people are going to create jobs for all you poor people out there, and you're all going to be wealthy. And you know that there's going to be lots of new tax breaks for the big multinationals after Donald Trump gets in, and a lack of responsibility in terms of caring for the earth. That's called exercising a hermeneutic of suspicion when we look at those kinds of things. This glyphosate thing, and the reason I'm sort of dealing with this morning is that my neighbor got under my skin. So it's all Keith's kind of fault here that I'm talking about this morning.
Can I add 30 seconds?
This is not planned. Keith, get up and add your 30 seconds. You absolutely can.
When I was checking into this, one of the topics was they spray.
Keith, you got to stand up and so everybody can hear you.
They spray in thousands of acres of lots, eh? So I said, what if there are people walking or animals? They said, I said, what about animals who are in this area and then walk miles into some other area? And then maybe someone shoots a moose or a deer and eats it. And they said, we have it covered. We post. In other words, they put signs up with this spray. And I said, but animals have trouble reading. A lot of them don't have glasses. Thank you.
My friend Keith, often better than me, exercises what I call that ability to view the world through a hermeneutic of suspicion. And it's not that we want to be paranoid, and you cannot ignore science. In fact, part of what the previous government was really terrible for was discarding science-based evidence, right? And I was talking with some members of the legislature about this too, right? So we want to have evidence that is science-based, but a great deal of the research we know that is done in the world today too is done hand in hand with industry and with business and whatnot. And there's wherever you see, and we know that the corporate sector, and I'm not anti-corporate as well, but the corporate sector that wants to produce softwood products at the exclusion of other products has a vested interest in this. It gives us cause for suspicion. And a huge part of what Jesus calls us to is to search for truth. Truth where it may be uncomfortable, truth where it's being subverted by all sorts of influences. And when it comes to the trees of our province, right at this point in time in the spring of glyphosate, I'm not sure what the entire verdict is, but I am very suspicious that all these chemicals being used around our province in such kinds of endeavors, I'm very suspicious that they are totally safe and healthy for us. Every week, a new person is being diagnosed in our congregation with cancer. And, and you've just got to recognize where there is that much smoke, there has got to be fire. So I call us all this day, Keith calls us all this day, to exercise a hermeneutic of suspicion. I prefer the word holy suspicion. Exercise holy suspicion as we reflect upon decisions that our culture makes, our political processes make, not to ignore science, not to avoid it, but to be very, very careful about the vested interests in our world that may influence decision-making in a way that isn't totally healthy for us. Keith, namaste, my friend. Namaste. Amen.
A farmer plants the seeds of all varieties. A young man has a smile for each neighbor that he sees. A child walks to school in hand-me-down shoes. They're building new bike lanes. I've just learned this on the news. There's hope for the world. I'm living it every day. There's hope for the world. It hasn't quite slipped away. There's hope for the world. We're gonna make it through. There's hope for the world within me and within you. There's beauty in the way a cobbler knows his craft. He brings them back to life. Our souls worn down to half. A woman with a dream. She sets her team to weave. They're strengthening the cloth of our community. There's hope for the world. I'm seeing it every day. There's hope for the world. It hasn't quite slipped away. There's hope for the world. We're gonna make it through. Within me and within you. There's hope for the world. I'm seeing it every day. There's hope for the world. It hasn't quite slipped away. There's hope for the world. Well, we're gonna make it through. There's hope for the world within every one of you. There's hope. There's hope. We're gonna make it through. We're gonna make it through. Hope for the world. George, you be seated.
And a big hand for And there is hope for the world if we all take responsibility and exercise that holy suspicion I was talking about earlier on, and all contribute towards the wisest decision-making possible in our world. So thank you so much, Rick and choir, for sharing that gift with us. Also invite Isabel and Cheryl to come forward at this time as well. So friends, we are here this day, and the first Sunday in October is always the Sunday on which we celebrate the sacrament of Holy Communion. This is Worldwide Communion Sunday, and on this day, Christian children and adults all around the world are participating in this meal from different nationalities, colors. We're all celebrating this at the same time.
And in this meal, the bread that we eat comes from the one loaf, and the wine that we drink comes from the one cup. And for Christians, the bread represents the nourishment that God provides for the shared human life that we also share with Jesus. The wine represents the gift of joy and blessing Jesus made known to us in his life, namely God's Spirit present amongst us in human form.
In the United Church of Canada, as we often say, we celebrate a totally open table. And that is for any of you, children, women, men, who feel you have been touched, or if you yearn to be touched by the presence of God as it was and is revealed in Jesus, you're all welcome to this meal.
To receive the meal this morning, we invite you to simply come forward in the center aisle, go to the servers that are on your side, and take a piece of bread and then eat it immediately. Then take a cup of juice from the serving tray and drink it. And please then, as you return through the side aisles and back up the middle, just place your little cup in the baskets provided on the side. And if you have gluten allergies, there are rice wafers available also, so just take one of the rice wafers. And also, if you're unable to come forward, just please wait till the end, and we will come and serve you in your seat. But you just need to raise your hand to let us know that you'd like to be served. We now come together in prayer.
And as we do so, we're delighted to invite our children to come forward and to share in this meal with us as well. Okay. Let us pray. Wonderful God, during this sacred meal, we honor the way in which Jesus revealed you to us. We give thanks for the demonstration of your incredible love, wisdom, and compassion made in Jesus' life.
In the sharing of this meal, we celebrate the ongoing presence of your Spirit and power in our lives, sustaining us and continually leading us into new life in this world and the next. We celebrate that all life emerges from you and is connected within you. And we acknowledge your desire to live through each one of us, like you did through Jesus, and to be agents of life and love, rather than agents of death and despair.
On this Worldwide Communion Sunday, we recognize our connection with sisters and brothers all around the world sharing this family meal. And we recognize, too, our connection with all life and all beings everywhere, animals, forests, birds, fish, the earth itself.
Radiant God, consecrate this meal, and through it continue to transform our hearts and minds with your Spirit, that we may feel our connection with you more profoundly, and through you with all of life. From that awareness, work through us to bring your love into the world. Amen.
My friends, this is one loaf, one bread of life, the one ultimate source of nourishment that is God's own being. Praise be to God. Amen.
And remembering the traditions surrounding Jesus, we fill this cup. The cup of blessing, friends.
So these gifts of God are now ready for the people of God. We'll start with the choir as we move down, and then we'll invite people to come forward by the front rows.